Welcome. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the runZero platform. runZero is a cyber asset attack surface management solution that is the first step in security risk management and the best way for organizations to understand their exposure through comprehensive security visibility. In this demonstration, I'm going to show you both of those things, the exposure management piece as well as the comprehensive security visibility piece. We'll start with the second part first. Throughout this demonstration, I'm going to be using the term asset. So let's dig into what I mean by that when I say it. So when I say an asset, I mean a compute device plus all the details that can help the security team. This includes hardware. So you can see hardware over here. This includes software. So there's a list of software that's on this particular device. There's also the services. So here we have the list of services that's listing on both IPv4 as well as IPv6, although some of these are only listing on IPv4. And then we have vulnerabilities and insecure configurations. We also have ownership information. And then finally, security controls. So you can see over here, we have an EDR on this device. And so that is what I mean by an asset and what you should expect from any CAASM solution. Does this device, this endpoint, have endpoint detection and response on it, EDR on it? That's a security controls detail. Does this device have a service on it that is using a certificate that's expiring or already expired? That's a service detail. Who should I talk to remediate a problem on this particular endpoint? That's an ownership detail. So that's how runZero goes deep. Now let's talk about going wide. runZero can discover devices of all types, IT, IoT, and OT, no matter where they are, on-premise, in the cloud, or remote. Let me start with device types. So here we have an IP camera. If you are familiar with the challenges in asset discovery, you already know that runZero is unparalleled in its capabilities for fingerprinting. Most discovery solutions will simply identify an IoT device as a Linux device or a Raspberry Pi or SPRIF device. Here we actually are identifying the hardware. And why? Because that's an asset detail that's important to security teams. It matters to us to know that this thing is a Glade plugin versus an IP camera. If it's an IP camera and it gets owned, then the adversary has the ability to spy on your factory floor. If it's a Glade plugin that gets owned, well, then you might have a stinky room, right? So it matters to know what that hardware is, as opposed to just the operating system or the IoT platform that's on that device. So here we have a PLC, a programmable logic controller, which is a device that you typically find in an OT or ICS environment. And as you can see, we have identified the hardware along with numerous other details. And there are three important things that I want to highlight here. First and foremost, runZero is one of the few CAASM vendors that has a native capability to go out and discover all of your OT and ICS devices. Two, runZero is the only CAASM vendor that has the ability to go and do that type of discovery using active scanning and do it safely to avoid outages in your OT environment. And three, if you are part of an organization that does not allow active scanning in the OT environment, we also have a passive discovery capability called passive traffic sampling. And unlike traditional passive discovery solutions, passive traffic sampling is done entirely in software. So you do not need to deploy all of these high resource hardware appliances to collect all the network traffic. And so you can get up and running very quickly. So We have shown how runZero can discover all device types, IT, IoT, and OT. And now let's move on to how runZero can cover all of your environments. This asset we showed earlier is an example of a typical endpoint that's connected to the network. runZero can find it. Check out the details here. Notice we have details from the runZero scanner, CrowdStrike integration, as well as the VMware integration. Here's an example of a network device on the network. runZero can find it. Check out the details. We even know which endpoints are hanging off of this particular switch. Notice that we have details from the runZero scanner as well as some integrations. Here's an example of a cloud resource. Cloud environments aren't traditionally part of a corporate network, but as a security team, we still have to protect it. And so runZero brings in visibility for it. All right, check out the details here. And notice that we have details from the runZero scanner as well as the AWS integration. So in this case, the AWS integration is providing that inside out look for this EC2 instance, whereas the runZero scanner is providing that outside in view of the same EC2 instance. Here is an example of an endpoint that is not connected to the network. Notice how the runZero scanner is not one of the sources. This could be a remote employee's laptop that has never come to the office or something along those lines. And so we rely on the integrations to get information about it. So as you can see, runZero covers all device types, IT, IoT, OT, no matter where they are, on-premise, in the cloud, or remote.
But for many security teams, that's not the whole story. With many organizations, the real problem are all those devices that got stood up without security ever being told, so-called shadow IT devices, or machines that were at one point managed, but are no longer because the person that was managing it moved on to a different role or went to a different company, so they're forgotten about. Or devices that were supposed to have been decommissioned 18 months ago, but never were. And it's not just devices. Sometimes you even uncover entire subnets that you didn't even know about that was just flying under the radar. The good news is runZero can help you with this type of unknown on your network. There are many other solutions out there that can tell you more about what you already know. There are many CAASM solutions out there that are simply aggregators of existing data from your tech stack. runZero is the only CAASM solution that can actually tell you about the unknown unknowns on your network.
So here's a report that shows all the private address ranges, like all the RFC 1918 address ranges. Each block here represents a subnet. And as you can see, some have been scanned and some have not been scanned. What's most interesting for telling you about unknown unknowns on your network are these subnets with the red border, the blocks with the red border on it. This indicates that we have found an asset here that has a secondary IP address in that subnet, and we have not done any discovery in that subnet yet. Now, this could be because you simply have not configured runZero to do discovery on that subnet so far, but you were going to do that as part of future work, or it could be because you didn't even know that subnet was active on your network. And whatever the case might be, it's definitely something you want to look into. There's also a great way to do discovery on all the IP, all the private address ranges, all at once. runZero has this quick way to do discovery on the entire set of RFC 1918 address ranges with just a few clicks. And the results from this discovery will then populate the entire report that you just saw earlier. Here's another way that runZero can tell you more of what you didn't know, your unknown unknowns. This is the unmapped max report over here. And in this report, there's one table per switch, and each row indicates a device that's hanging off of that switch for which we have not performed any discovery yet. So it should be no surprise that all we know about this device so far is the MAC address. And this could indicate a couple of things. First, there may be some sort of segmentation issue that prevents runZero from learning about that device. Or it could indicate that there's a subnet over there that you didn't know existed. Whatever the case might be, though, it's definitely something that's worth looking into, and runZero is pointing you to it. Right? It's bringing this information, surfacing that to you, so you're no longer left in the dark about this particular device. So runZero can discover all types of devices, no matter where they are, even if they are unknown devices, even if they are on unknown subnets. And as you can imagine, this type of discovery takes advantage of many sources. In fact, runZero is the only CAASM solution that takes advantage of, or that leverages, API integrations, a proprietary scanner. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering, no, this is not Nmap under the hood. The runZero scanner is proprietary technology. It was built from scratch and is one of the main reasons why we are able to show so much granularity of detail that you're seeing in this demonstration. But hard no, it is not Nmap under the hood. No code is shared between the two projects. And finally, there is passive traffic sampling, which is a passive discovery capability that does not require powerful hardware appliances to collect all the network traffic. For those of you who are protecting OT or ICS environments, this might be a good option for you if active scanning is not allowed by your organization. So even though runZero is bringing together all this data from all these different sources, you as the user do not have to do any sort of advanced data analytics to correlate this all together or stitch it all together, which is something that you might be doing right now in code or in a spreadsheet. You don't have to do any of that because runZero does that for you through its correlation engine. Let me take you back to an example of a device that has details from multiple sources. As you can see here, we have data from the runZero scanner, CrowdStrike, VMware, Tenable, Rapid7, and Qualys. And all of this shows up as a single record in runZero. Here are some asset level details from those various sources. Some of the details from various sources also show up in ownership, software, vulnerabilities, and other groups of details for an asset. Most importantly, it's all in one place. You don't have to jump around multiple consoles to stitch all this information together yourself. And the upshot here is that runZero can reconcile data across multiple sources, which reduces your overhead through a single normalized view. And now you might be wondering, what about an integration with solution X or product Y? You can jump over here and see a list of all the integrations that come with runZero. And if for some reason we don't have a native integration for it, you can take advantage of our Ingress SDK to bring that data in. All right, before I close out this section on comprehensive visibility, I also want to show you how runZero can even provide visibility from outside the firewall through the lens of the adversary. runZero can do discovery on your external attack surface. We can do this with an integration with another EASM solution, external attack surface management solution. You can also use runZero's native active scan capability with an Explorer that is hosted and managed by runZero. So in our cloud, you can run a scan from our cloud. And this allows you to get that sort of inside out as well as outside in view of your assets. By the way, most CAASM solutions really only provide visibility to the internal attack surface. runZero is one of the very few CAASM solutions that even considers the concept of multiple attack surfaces. So here I'm going to filter by all of the assets that are part of my internal attack surface. Now I'm going to filter by the external attack surface and the cloud attack surface and so on. With runZero, you can contextualize your assets based on the attack surface that they're related to. And this will become very important in the next section when we look at how runZero can help with exposure management, because you want to know which assets are contributing to the riskiness of which attack surface. And so there you have it. runZero fundamentally provides comprehensive security visibility. And so this means telling you about all your devices, including the information, the details that matter to security teams. This means in-depth, accurate, granular fingerprinting. This means telling you about your devices, no matter their type, IT, IoT, or OT. This means telling you about your devices no matter where they are, on-premise or in the cloud or remote. This means also telling you about the devices that you did not know about and the networks that you did not know about, all those unknown unknowns on your network. This also means giving you that inside out as well as outside in view of those devices. And this also means telling you about how those assets relate to your attack surface, how they contribute risk to those attack surfaces. And it also means bringing this all together in a single consolidated, normalized view. And with that, you can actually go on to the next step, which is understanding your exposure, which we'll talk about next. So you see here in this asset inventory, I have many, many assets. And if my goal is to lock down the biggest gaps in my security, where do I even start? With runZero, you have the ability to automatically assign risk and criticality rankings to assets, which allows you to quickly filter down to your riskiest assets, allowing you to know right away where you should focus to take care of the most vulnerable parts of your network. So how do we know it's risky though? Right, let's dig into that. runZero has integrations with vuln scanners like Rapid7, Qualys, and Tenable. A runZero asset can inherit riskiness rankings from those imported vulnerabilities. Here you can see a list of vulns that were imported from Tenable. The riskiest vuln is a medium. And at the asset level, you can see that it's showing medium risk as well. Another way runZero can help with risk management is by identifying assets that are potentially vulnerable to a CVE based on asset details alone. So what do I mean by that? So let's say there's somebody that you got to know, and one of the things you know about them is that they wear glasses.
And you know it's not sunglasses. It's the typical glasses when somebody has impaired vision. Now, let's say one day they say, okay, let's go get some coffee. And you say, oh, sure, let's go get some coffee. And then they take off those glasses and say, all right, let's head to the car. What thought goes through your mind? Well, obviously you're going to hesitate because based on what you know about them, you have a very confident belief that they have impaired vision. The thing is, though, unless you're an optometrist and you do an actual eye exam, you can't say definitively that they have impaired vision. And yet, in most cases, and for most intents and purposes, you're going to be right. They have impaired vision. And what you've done here is taking something that you know about them and use that as a proxy for that eye exam. Similarly, in order to determine whether or not a particular CVE is present on a device, you need to actually do a full Vuln scan with all the Vuln checks. Say, aha, definitively that CVE is there on that device, which takes a long time. Like eye exams take a long time, Vuln scans take a long time. What if you could use some other information as a proxy to determine with a high degree of confidence that that particular CVE is on that particular device? What if you can use asset details as a proxy to determine with a high degree of confidence that this particular device is potentially vulnerable? Well, in fact, many runZero users use runZero in this exact way. Big disclaimer, runZero is not a Vuln scanner. However, there are many runZero users that do look to runZero for quickly coming up with a punch list of devices to go and remediate while their Vuln scanner is catching up, while their Vuln scanner is waiting for a new Vuln check or signature to be released, or they're waiting for their Vuln scanner to conduct a full scan. This is particularly useful for those remotely discoverable O days that are just hitting the news, right? It's just getting published. Everybody is running around trying to figure out what their exposure is to this new vulnerability. Many users will then look to runZero without having to do a rescan to figure out what are the devices that are potentially vulnerable. Here you see a query that identifies with a high degree of confidence assets that are vulnerable to remove it. By enabling this toggle, runZero can start automatically adding additional vulnerability records to that asset alongside of the vulnerabilities that were imported. And just like in the last example, by default, the asset risk ranking comes from the riskiest vulnerability. In this case, since MoveIt is critical, assets that are deemed to be potentially vulnerable to MoveIt will have critical risk as well, unless that has been overridden. Okay, so in the two ways that I've discussed so far, we focused on vulnerabilities that have CVEs associated with it, and have gone through the process with the National Vulnerability Database. But of course, the adversary doesn't care to limit themselves just to exploits that are cataloged in the NVD. They will take advantage of anything, of course, including insecure configurations. And by that, I mean web services that have expired certificates or SSH servers that are allowing for password authentication, or maybe some sort of remote management protocol like RDP or VNC that's available over the internet, things along those lines. Here we have a query that's specifically there to find SSH servers where the adversary may be able to try passwords directly over the internet. And as you can see here, this insecure configuration has already been configured to automatically add a vuln record to any asset that matches this query. So runZero can help you understand riskiness on your assets in 3 different ways. First, by importing vulnerabilities from your Vuln scanner. Second, by using asset details to tell you with a high degree of confidence which assets are potentially vulnerable to a particular CVE. And finally, using asset details to tell you which devices have certain insecure configurations. And having that broad and current view of riskiness across all of your assets, of course, is a great thing. The next thing you want to do, of course, is to prioritize. And what I'm getting at here is the fact that each year there are 20,000 new vulnerabilities, half of which are high or critical. And you don't have a security team that's large enough to remediate all of that. And nor should you, because the adversary only ever exploits about 5% of those vulnerabilities. And so you want to focus, you want to prioritize, you want to make sure that your team is focused on guarding the bagfold as opposed to an empty warehouse. You want to make sure that they're focused on the assets that are critical to your organization and that are most likely to get attacked by the adversary. So how do you prioritize? Well, runZero can help you prioritize in a number of ways.
So having a broad and current view of asset risk is good, but your job doesn't end there. Next, you'll want to know where to focus, right? With 20,000 vulnerabilities being introduced every year, you don't have a security team that's large enough to fix everything. And with over 50% of vulnerabilities being marked as high or critical, and only 5% of vulnerabilities ever being actually exploited, you want to make sure that your team is focused on protecting what is valuable and what is most likely to be exploited. If you have one security analyst, do you want that person focused on guarding a bank vault or guarding an empty warehouse? So how do you prioritize? Well, runZero helps you prioritize in a number of ways. So let's assume that we're at an organization where IP cameras are mission critical for whatever reason. And maybe we rely on these cameras to make sure that the plant is operating properly, something along those lines. So I can filter down to my riskiest assets that are IP cameras. So here I'm bringing in asset detail. I'm bringing in asset detail to help me prioritize. Now, let's pause for a moment here. Remember what I said earlier, that an asset is a compute device with all the details that security teams care about. Hardware is one of those details. But this isn't enough, because we might be capturing cameras that aren't in plants, right? They might be in the offices or something like that. So let's bring in even more asset context. Let's say we know that plant ops is the owner of all the devices in our revenue generating plants. So let's filter down by asset owner as well. And once again, in runZero, an asset is a compute device with all the details that security teams care about. Asset ownership is one of those details. In fact, let me take a slight detour here from our prioritization exercise and tell you more about how ownership works in runZero. By the way, I'm using the term asset owner. At your organization, this might be called business owner or custodian or support group or technology owner or remediator. I've heard that too. Whatever the case might be, it's basically the people who can help you remediate a problem on that device. Well, in any case, why are there so many owners here for this particular asset? Well, in our conversations with customers, we've learned that there isn't a single owner. For many customers, there is the person that's using the device. There's the person that owns that business function that person reports to. Many companies have like IT owners, so people who are responsible for keeping that device up and running. And at some really large organizations, we even see like security owners, so people who are designated to protect that device. In any case, to support this multi-pronged nature of asset ownership, our asset ownership tracking allows for users to add up to 9 custom owner types, as you see here. The default one is called asset owner. And runZero can update asset ownership automatically through rules. Based on the query for this rule, you have the granularity to select which assets gets which ownership values. All right, so now that we've taken this quick detour about to show you asset ownership in runZero, let's jump back to our prioritization exercise. So far, we have filtered down by the hardware type, right, because we believe these IP cameras are mission critical to our business. And then we've also filtered now by asset owner, because we want to make sure that we're only capturing the revenue generating business unit. Now imagine if this still returns too many devices, right? Our security team is so understaffed that we really need to relentlessly prioritize to make sure that we're focused on absolutely the most important risks to our organization. So let's bring in some network context as well. So as I mentioned earlier, runZero is one of the few CAASMs that support multiple attack surfaces. Now, obviously, assets on our external attack surface are more likely to be targeted by the adversary. So let's filter by that as well. Okay. And let's go even further. So let's pretend that there's just still too many assets and we're so understaffed that we need even more prioritization here. So let's go further and let's bring in details from our Vault scanner. And so now I'm filtering to show only the ones that have critical risk. Right? Only the IP cameras in the revenue generating business unit that are externally facing and have a vulnerability on them that is critical. And that vulnerability could be something with a CV attached to it, or it could be an insecure configuration. Another way that runZero can help understand exposure is through reachability analysis. Here is the asset route pathing report. It can tell you about multiple potential network paths between any two devices. The paths come from a combination of analyzing IPv4 and IPv6 traceroute data in combination with subnet analyses of devices that we've detected to be multi-home hosts. And all of this is done without any sort of access to the individual hosts or network equipment along the path. So with a view of potential paths, you can now verify whether or not a low trust asset is able to reach a high value target in your network. Another important topic within exposure management is maximizing security controls. In fact, maximizing security controls is oftentimes one of the first reasons why organizations look for a CAASM solution. One specific example of a security control is endpoint detection and response, EDR. Obviously, devices without EDR are more likely to be targeted by the adversary. And so you can improve your overall security posture by trying to make sure that EDR is deployed on as many endpoints as possible. Basically, wherever they can be deployed, they should be deployed. And because runZero has the ability to go out and find everything on your network, when you combine that comprehensive asset inventory with information from that control, from that EDR, for example, you are able to find out what are the gaps. Like, what are all the devices that can have this EDR but don't have that EDR? So let's take a look at that. This is what we call a goal in runZero. It's just a quick and easy way for you to measure your progress towards some sort of proactive metric within your security program. So in this demo, what you're seeing is we have a policy that says we want to have at least 95% coverage with our CrowdStrike EDR. So we have a goal for that. We can view our progress in fulfilling our corporate security policy for each organization or for the entire company. And from here, I can also come up with a list of devices missing my EDR so I can kick off remediation. So how does this all work under the hood? Well, goals are built on top of queries in runZero. By the way, I showed this earlier without properly introducing it. This is the runZero query library. Many of the queries that you see in this demonstration actually are already pre-populated for all runZero users. You can create your own as well. You can create your own queries, but there are plenty of queries already in here that you can use to get started the moment you sign up for the product. But back to finding endpoints missing CrowdStrike. Here we know from our full inventory that these are all the devices where we should find our EDR. And we know from our CrowdStrike integration which endpoints have CrowdStrike Falcon, which allows us to use the inverse here to determine the list of endpoints missing EDR. Now, keep in mind, security controls aren't just EDR, but also includes vuln scanners, segmentation, and so much more. And runZero can help with that too. So here's an example of a goal targeted at maximizing your vuln scanning coverage. Notice that you can even scope your coverage by a specific attack surface, your external attack surface in this case. Another control is segmentation, and runZero can help identify potential violations to your segmentation policy. One way is through that asset route pathing report that I showed you earlier. Here is another report that's worth looking at. In this report, we have subnets in green, which are private subnets, and then the red ones are public subnets. And what you're seeing over here are assets that are potential pivot points from the internet to your private network. You can also focus on the assets that the adversary is more likely to target. And so here I'm showing potential bridges between the outside and the inside that also have remote management running on them. All right, so this closes out our section on how runZero helps teams understand their exposure through comprehensive security visibility. One easy way that runZero helps enable the rest of your tech stack is through a native egress integration. I'll talk about just two of these in this video. One popular one is our Splunk integration for those who want to bring runZero asset data into their SIEM to help with investigations. This Splunk app will bring newly found assets or newly updated assets into Splunk. Another popular integration is our Service Graph app for ServiceNow. So this brings runZero assets into your CMDB. The mappings from runZero attributes to ServiceNow configuration items are already pre-done, like the mappings are already there. So you don't have to do any mapping yourself. Although if you want to, you do have the ability to override if that's something you want to do. We also have egress integrations with Palo Alto as well as Tines if you're interested in that. Going beyond integrations, you also have the ability to integrate with anything else with a runZero alert. A runZero alert is how you can trigger an arbitrary notification to another system via a webhook. So you start by creating a channel. And once you create the channel, you can create a new rule. Triggering an alert right after discovering new assets is a very, very common practice for runZero users, but we also have numerous other events for you to choose from if that's of interest. Simply configure the rule to make sure that you're only acting on the assets that you're interested in. And then you select your webhook. Finally, let's move on to how runZero can help with reducing regulatory compliance risk. First and foremost, runZero can help identify compliance violations. For example, with this query, you can identify all the devices that are prohibited under NDAA Section 889. So the National Defense Authorization Act, Section 889. These devices here are have relationships with foreign entities that is not allowed by the federal government. With this Open Bridges report that I showed earlier, you can identify potential PCI DSS violations.
Beyond helping out with the negative, meaning going beyond helping you find compliance violations, runZero can also help with the positive, meaning satisfying what is typically the very first requirement in any cybersecurity framework. One that we all know, of course, is CIS controls. And allow me to read an excerpt for you. This is CIS control number 1. Establish and maintain an accurate, detailed, and up-to-date inventory of all enterprise devices that potentially store or process data. And this includes end-user devices, network devices, non-compute and IoT devices, as well as servers. And it also talks about the type of detail that you want to see in that inventory. This should include the network address, hardware address, the machine name, ownership, department, and so on and so forth. So really telling us that it shouldn't just be a list of IP addresses or anything like, or a list of machines, but you need to also have details in there that can really help the security team do their job. And it's not just CIS controls. If you look at other frameworks like C2M2, the ACID domain is asking for something similar. If you look at NIST CSF, the ID.am function is requiring something similar. And if you're looking at specific industries, the BOD 2301 has requirements around asset inventory and vulnerability enumeration, which runZero satisfied. And this, of course, applies to federal civilian agencies. If you're in finance, there's the NYSDFS, which also has requirements around asset inventory and vulnerability management, which runZero satisfies. So there you have it. runZero can not just help with the negative of compliance, but also the positive compliance with this really fundamental function of asset inventory and vulnerability enumeration. All right, so that wraps it up for this walkthrough of the runZero platform. If you are a current runZero customer and if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to contact your account representative or your customer success engineer. But as always, anyone, if you have any comments or feedback on what you've seen here in this walkthrough, feel free at any time to contact me directly, Huxley@runzero.com.